I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. $87.42. That was all that was left. My stomach twisted as I refreshed the page, hoping, praying for a mistake. But the numbers didn't change. "Lena, you okay?" Marcus's voice snapped me out of my daze. I looked up from my laptop to see him leaning casually against the doorframe of our tiny office. His expensive watch glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Yeah," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just checking the accounts." He smirked and walked into the room, clapping his hands together. "Good news, team," he announced to the few employees still hanging on. "We're making progress, but we need to tighten up for a bit. Cash flow issues, you know how it is." "Cash flow issues?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He shot me a warning look before continuing. "Salaries might be delayed a week or two, but it's just temporary. Trust me, we're on the verge of something big." The room fell silent. My chest tightened as I glanced around at the weary faces of our team. They nodded reluctantly, too tired or too desperate to argue. That night, I sat alone in the office, scrolling through spreadsheets and transaction histories. Something wasn't adding up. Expenses were higher than they should have been. And then I saw it. Multiple transfers from our business account to an offshore account I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I clicked through the details. The account belonged to Marcus. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, my heart racing with anger and disbelief. "Lena," he answered smoothly, like he'd been expecting my call. "What the hell is this?" I snapped, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Transfers from our account to your offshore account? Care to explain?" There was a pause before he chuckled softly. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" My voice cracked as tears stung my eyes. "You've been stealing from us. From me." "Stealing?" he repeated with mock indignation. "Come on, Lena. You didn't really think we were equals, did you?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "We built this together," I whispered, my voice trembling. "No," he said coldly. "I built this. You were just along for the ride." I couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from my hand as his laughter echoed in my ears. The next morning, I walked into the office with a pit in my stomach and resignation in my heart. Marcus wasn't there. He never showed up when things got messy. But his betrayal was everywhere. In the empty chairs of employees who had quit, in the unpaid bills piling up on my desk, and in the broken dreams that had once felt so full of promise. I sat down at my desk and stared at the blank screen in front of me. What now? The phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Ms. Carter, this is your final notice." I hung up and slammed the phone face down on the counter. My hands trembled as I stared at the eviction notice on my fridge. The studio apartment was cramped, damp, and smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes. But even this was slipping away. Selling my car was the hardest part. The dealership appraiser eyed my sedan like it was trash. "Best I can do is $4,000, he said, kicking the tire. I wanted to scream. I bought this car brand new 3 years ago. But I nodded silently. The check barely covered 1 month's debt payments. Maya showed up at my door that evening, her eyes scanning the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. "Lena, just come stay with us," she pleaded, holding my hands. "The kids miss you. I miss you." I pulled away, my pride flaring. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," she snapped, gesturing to the stack of unpaid bills on the table. "You're drowning." "I'll figure it out," I muttered, avoiding her gaze. She left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The next morning, I sat in a corner booth at a dingy coffee shop, nursing a $2 black coffee. That's when I heard him. "Money isn't about what you have, but how you think," a gravelly voice said. I glanced over. An older man in a tweed blazer was lecturing a teenager at the next table. The boy rolled his eyes, but the man continued. The wealthy don't chase money. They build systems. You understand? I stiffened, my pride warring with desperation. After the boy left, I approached his table. "Excuse me, I couldn't help overhearing." He looked up, his sharp blue eyes piercing. "And? I need help," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He studied me for a moment before gesturing to the seat across from him. "Sit." I obeyed, my heart racing. "Name's Victor Grant," he said, pulling a worn notebook from his bag. "I'll meet you here tomorrow at 7 a.m. But know this." He leaned forward, his tone stern. "This isn't a quick fix." I nodded, hope flickering in my chest for the first time in months. "Good," he said, standing abruptly. "Don't be late." That night, lying on my air mattress, I stared at the water-stained ceiling. Victor's words replayed in my mind. Money isn't about what you have, but how you think. For the first time since Marcus's betrayal, I felt something other than despair. Curiosity. Maybe I can't fix this. But what if I can? Victor's office wasn't what I expected. The bookstore cafe smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, and the tables were cluttered with half-read novels and abandoned mugs. Victor sat in the corner, surrounded by stacks of books and a battered leather bag. He waved me over without looking up from his notebook. "Sit," he said, flipping a page. I slid into the chair across from him, my nerves buzzing. He pulled out a worn notebook and placed it between us. The cover was faded, the edges frayed like it had been through decades of use. "This," he said, tapping it, "is everything I've learned about money." I stared at it, unsure what to say. "Rule 1, he began, leaning back in his chair. "Money flows to those who respect it." I frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means," he said sharply, "you can't build wealth if you're bleeding money without knowing where it's going." He pushed the notebook toward me and gestured for me to open it. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, principles, charts, lists. But one phrase stood out. "Track every penny." "You're going to track every dollar you spend for the next month," Victor said firmly. I blinked at him. "Every penny?" $4 coffees. "Especially $4 coffees," he replied with a smirk. I laughed nervously. "That feels pointless." Victor leaned forward, his blue eyes sharp. "You'll never build wealth if you don't see where it's leaking." His words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Reluctantly, I agreed. That evening, I bought a cheap notebook from the dollar store and started tracking my expenses. At first, it felt tedious, writing down every coffee, every meal, every impulse purchase. But within days, patterns began to emerge. By the end of the month, the numbers horrified me. $300 on takeout, $200 on unused subscriptions, $150 on random impulse buys, things I didn't even remember purchasing. I stared at the totals in disbelief. How did I let it get this bad? At our next meeting, I slid my notebook across the table to Victor. He flipped through it silently before nodding. "Good," he said finally. "Now, you see where the problem is." I swallowed hard. "So, what do I do now?" Victor smiled for the first time since we'd met. "Now, you plug the leaks." He handed me a list of tasks. Cancel subscriptions, meal prep instead of eating out, set spending limits for non-essentials. It felt overwhelming at first, but Victor's confidence in me sparked something small and fragile inside. Hope. As I left the cafe that day with my notebook clutched tightly in my hands, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to fight back. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the row of designer blouses and tailored skirts I'd once worn to pitch meetings. Each piece was a reminder of who I used to be. Confident, ambitious, successful. Now they felt like relics of a life I couldn't afford anymore. I grabbed the hangers one by one and started packing them into boxes. The resale site promised quick cash, but it still stung to let them go. Canceling subscriptions was easier, though no less humiliating. "No more Netflix," Sarah asked when I told her over the phone. "What are you going to do for fun?" "I don't have time for fun," I replied flatly. She laughed nervously. "You sound like a college student trying to stretch their allowance." Her words stung, but I didn't argue. She wouldn't understand. Victor pushed me even further during our next meeting at the cafe. "You need more income," he said bluntly, sipping his coffee. "Get a job you're overqualified for." "A job? Like what?" I asked hesitantly. "Something humbling," he said with a shrug. "Humility pays." I stared at him, unsure if he was joking or serious. "You want me to work, what, retail?" "Warehouse," he replied without missing a beat. "Night shift." I wanted to protest, to tell him I wasn't that desperate, but the truth was, I was exactly that desperate. The warehouse job was brutal. Every night I stacked boxes until my hands blistered and my back screamed in protest. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as forklifts beeped endlessly in the background. My coworkers barely spoke. They were too tired to care about small talk. And I spent most of my breaks staring at the vending machine, wondering if I could spare $1 for a snack. One night, after my shift ended at 3 a.m., I sat in my car scrolling through LinkedIn while nursing sore hands. That's when I saw it. Marcus's profile. He had posted photos from a luxury vacation in Dubai, 5-star hotels, private yachts, champagne dinners. The caption read, "Work hard, play harder." Rage surged through me like wildfire. He stole from me, from us. And this is what he does with it? I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. The anger burned deep, but it didn't consume me. It fueled me. The next morning, as I packed another box of clothes to sell online and prepped meals for the week with cheap groceries, Marcus's smug face lingered in my mind. Victor's words echoed in my head. Humility pays. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting back. Victor leaned back in his chair, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smirk. "The wealthy don't work for money. They make money work for them." I frowned, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "What does that even mean?" "It means," he said, leaning forward, "you need to stop chasing paychecks and start building streams of income. Passive income." "Passive income?" I repeated skeptically. Victor nodded and pulled out his notebook, flipping to a page filled with neat charts and handwritten notes. "Dividend investing," he said simply. "You buy shares in companies that pay dividends, profits they share with investors, and those payouts become your income." I stared at the page, trying to process it all. So, I just buy stocks and wait for money to show up? Not quite, Victor said with a chuckle. It's about choosing wisely. Companies that are stable, consistent. You're not gambling, you're planting seeds. A week later, I sat at my kitchen table with $500 saved from selling clothes and working night shifts. It felt like everything I had in the world, and my hands shook as I hovered over the buy button on my brokerage app. Victor had recommended a REIT, a real estate investment trust that paid dividends quarterly. He'd explained it was a good starting point for beginners like me. This is it, I thought as I pressed the button. My first step towards something better. Months passed, and life didn't get easier overnight. The warehouse shifts were still grueling, and meal prepping felt like a never-ending chore. But one morning, as I checked my brokerage account, I saw it. $12 in dividends deposited into my account. $12. It wasn't much, barely enough for lunch, but it felt monumental. It wasn't money I'd earned through sweat or sacrifice. It was money that had worked for me while I slept. I stared at the screen, tears welling in my eyes. This is hope, I thought. Meanwhile, Marcus's name started popping up online, not in the way he'd hoped. A viral expose revealed his fraudulent transfers and shady business practices. His startup collapsed within weeks, leaving him disgraced and bankrupt. Karma? Maybe. But I didn't have time to dwell on his downfall. I was too focused on my spreadsheet. Every week, I updated my net worth tracker Victor had insisted I create. Debt, shrinking slowly but surely. Savings, creeping upward bit by bit. Investments, growing steadily. Watching those numbers change, even by small amounts, felt like progress. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something. As I sat at my kitchen table that evening, reviewing my spreadsheet and planning my next investment, Victor's words echoed in my mind. Plant seeds. I wasn't wealthy yet, not even close, but I was learning how to think like someone who could be. I was halfway through my shift at the warehouse, wiping sweat from my forehead, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old colleague, Jared. "Hey, Lena. I've got a side gig you might be interested in. Easy money. Let's talk." Easy money. My curiosity piqued, but something about the phrasing made my stomach twist. Still, I couldn't afford to ignore opportunities. We met at a diner the next evening. Jared leaned across the table, lowering his voice like we were spies in a movie. "Here's the deal," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "You help me falsify invoices for some clients, and we split the cut. 70-30 in your favor." I froze, staring at the folder like it might burn me. "Falsify invoices?" I repeated slowly. "It's harmless," he said with a shrug. "Nobody gets hurt, and you could pay off your debts faster." My heart raced as I imagined clearing my credit cards in weeks instead of months. The temptation was suffocating. But then Victor's voice echoed in my mind. "Wealth built on lies crumbles faster." I pushed the folder back toward Jared, my hands trembling. "I can't do this." Jared frowned, his tone shifting from friendly to annoyed. "Lena, come on. You're drowning. You need this." "I'll figure it out," I said firmly, standing up and grabbing my bag. "Thanks for thinking of me, but no." That night, I couldn't sleep. The temptation lingered like a shadow in my mind. What if I'd said yes? But deep down, I knew Victor was right. Shortcuts like that never ended well. A few days later, as I checked my brokerage account during a break at work, I saw something that made me gasp. My REIT investment had spiked 20%. I stared at the screen in disbelief before calling Victor. "It's up 20%, I said breathlessly when he answered. "What do I do?" Victor chuckled softly. "Sell half if you need the cash. Pay off one of those credit cards." "Are you sure?" I asked nervously. "You're learning," he said simply. That evening, I sold half of my shares and used the money to pay off one of my smaller credit cards entirely. Watching the balance drop to zero felt like lifting a weight off my chest. Victor's words echoed again. "You're learning." Jared texted me later that week. "You sure about passing on this? Last chance." I deleted the message without replying. As I updated my net worth tracker that night, watching the debt shrink and investments grow, I realized something. Integrity mattered more than speed. Victor had taught me that wealth wasn't just about numbers. It was about building something solid and lasting. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing exactly that. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through the window of my modest, debt-free apartment. The air smelled faintly of coffee, and my laptop hummed softly as I reviewed my portfolio. 5 years ago, this moment would have felt impossible. Back then, I was drowning in debt, working night shifts, and barely scraping by. Now, passive income covered my bills. Dividends from investments I'd nurtured like fragile seedlings. I scrolled through the numbers on my screen. Monthly expenses, covered. Emergency fund, growing steadily. Investments, thriving. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a deep breath. I did it. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up and froze when I saw the name, Marcus Reed. The email subject line read, "Urgent help needed." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Lena," it began, "I know we've had our differences, but things have taken a turn for the worse. My business has collapsed, and I'm facing bankruptcy. I need a loan to get back on my feet. Just $20,000 to start." I stared at the screen, anger bubbling up like acid in my chest. He stole from me, betrayed me, and now he wants help? My finger hovered over the reply button for a moment before I hit delete. A week later, I stood in a quiet cemetery, under a gray sky. Victor's funeral was small, but heartfelt. Family members and a few close friends sharing stories about his wisdom and generosity. His grandson approached me after the service, holding an envelope in his hands. "Victor wanted you to have this," he said softly. I opened it carefully, my breath catching as I pulled out a check for $10,000 and a handwritten note. "Invest in someone who thinks like you do now." Tears blurred my vision as I folded the note back into the envelope. Victor had believed in me when no one else did, and now he was passing that belief forward. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again, staring at the check and thinking about Victor's words. "Invest in someone who thinks like you do now." I thought about all the people who were where I'd been 5 years ago, drowning in debt, desperate for hope, and realized what I needed to do. As I updated my portfolio one last time before bed, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of purpose beyond numbers and spreadsheets. Wealth wasn't just about money anymore. It was about building something meaningful and helping others do the same. Victor had taught me that, and now it was my turn to pass it on.